Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Clodagh Dowling, who first joined me on the channel back in 2021. Clodagh is a clinical psychologist based at St Patrick's Mental Health Services in Dublin, where she specialises in compassion-focused therapy, particularly in the treatment of eating disorders. She's played a key role in bringing CFT for eating disorders, or CFT-E, into clinical practice and research, helping individuals struggling with self-criticism and shame develop a more compassionate relationship with themselves. In this conversation, we'll explore her work, the impact of CFT-E, and what we can learn about the power of compassion in eating disorder recovery. And so I bring you Dr. Clodagh Dowling. All right. Well, Dr. Clodagh Dowling, welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you so much, Stan. Lovely to be here, and I love your compassion t-shirt.
Yes, thank you. We actually last spoke on the 7th of March, 2021. Actually,
Oh wow.
I looked it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
several years ago. And the funny thing is that I'm planning to release this particular episode on the 7th of March, 2025. So to the day.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, hopefully I'll have different things to say this time. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
And
it has been a very popular episode, I must say.
brilliant.
But yeah, so you work extensively with people suffering from eating disorders, I guess. How do you find that they initially think about compassion or self-compassion for that matter when they first enter treatment or join the CFT-E group?
Well, that's a good question. And there's kind of different where I work, there's I suppose different options. And when people first come to hospital and St. Patrick's Mental Health Services, they might go to an inpatient ward. And I don't work on the ward now, but I used to. And we would be introducing compassion, and it's very difficult for people to get all the concepts at that point. Their BMIs are really low. They're in a ward maybe where they don't necessarily want to be. Um, they're in biological starvation. Their competitive mindsets are activated by other people who are eating less or different weights. So starting a full CFT program is too much. So over the years, what I started and then what my team have developed now in a much better way is that they do a very gentle inpatient group that is based on kind of Yalom's therapeutic factors, but has concepts of CFT just kind of sprinkled in really, really lightly. So that's almost the beginning of the compassion journey for people. Then when those clients progress and they don't need inpatient as much, they then progress to a day patient service. And another of my clients, or another of my colleagues, Fanula McInerney, has developed, and Carl Toomey has developed this kind of group where it's a bit more than sprinkling of CFT, but it's mentioning more compassion, mentioning more the threat system, three circles, bringing in a little bit of chair work. So even beginning to interview the eating disorder, looking at the function of it. And what's key about that group, what makes it different to CFTE, is that there isn't a focus on the change. So we're just trying to get people to understand compassion, notice some of the fears and blocks come up, think about the language around the three circles, but there isn't a push on behavior change. So those kind of reactions that, we all know when people haven't learned about compassion, haven't had in their lives, of fears of it, worries that it's going to take away their drive system, all that is expected, but it's just really, really gentle. And then when people are more ready and their BMI is a little bit higher, and they've kind of liked the concept of compassion, they're kind of saying, actually, I find this really hard. This is something I know I don't have in my life. Then they might be more ready for the full CFTE program, which is a comprehensive treatment that looks at biological change and psychological change. So we're really then at that point using compassion to help people gain weight or reduce eating disorder behaviors and let go of those. But by introducing, not just letting go of something that they really depend on, but introducing an idea of actually this is something new as well about how you want to live your life compassionately without the eating disorder, rather than just a model that might take the eating disorder symptoms away. So we find that if people have had those kind of sprinklers of compassion in a really gentle way without pressure, that they're more ready then for the more intense comprehensive program.
Mm.
We do think that having compassion on the inpatient ward is really, really important because, as you know, and everyone in the area knows, that people with eating difficulties have strong levels of criticism and shame. And those with really strong levels of criticism and shame and low self-compassion are less likely to as well. So if you think about the cost and the investment people put in their lives to go to inpatient, and if you're not looking at shame and criticism and compassion early on, but you're in a really intensive treatment, the fears and blocks are going to stop you from progressing. So we do think it's really important to put it in. But I think if we go in too strongly, people aren't ready for it yet. And that they're already in their threat system. But having a sprinkler of it and helping people think about their minds, think about the three systems, even thinking about the mentalities, thinking about how when you're in a ward, biologically we're all programmed to compete, but when you're in a ward and people are restricting their diet, it's going to put in more pressure on you to lose more weight, or do I need enough help? Do I deserve enough help compared to others? So having a language in a safe way to discuss that without trying to push people to change seems to work really well.
Mm. Mm.
But it's taken us a while to figure that out, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, it's really that sort of gentle, gradual exposure almost in a way, and the inpatient sort of content is more likely to be the psychoeducation, maybe around some of the evolved tricky brain and the three circles model, and maybe some of that social mentalities or social rank theory stuff, maybe, or at least the competitive mind, and so just sort of orienting them to some of those basic, not basic, but foundational ideas, and then once they've moved to the next phase, then perhaps compassion, or the word compassion or self-compassion, really gets introduced. What do you notice is some of the comments and maybe even pushback on the word compassion or self-compassion? Is it as striking as that, or what do you notice at that point?
One of the things I've learned recently is that in our Irish language, the word compassion is trua, and that means pity, which obviously isn't what compassion
Isn't
is. But
quite what we're after.
no, so I think, and I'm sure there's lots of cultural difficulties with the word compassion. So obviously that's why we're really clear on how we define compassion in the CFT community. But I think people think, maybe it's pity, other people are pitying me, maybe it's weak. If I am more compassionate to myself, then I'm going to get fat, I'm going to gain weight, I'm going to be vulnerable. People will take advantage of me. I think those are the some of the very common fears and blocks. If I'm more compassionate, I'll get weak, or I'll be perceived as weak, or then maybe I'll fail. I won't be as good as things. I won't be able to get back. I'll lose control. Um, I think they're understandable blocks. And of course, this way I don't deserve it is another one that would come up. Maybe other people deserve it, but I don't, or I can see this for other people, but I can't accept it for myself. They're kind of typical fears and blocks that come up. But of course, even and that's all intellectual, I guess. But some of the inpatient work, Liesel, one of our psychologists works in the inpatient, will say that they can't. Lots of people coming in won't be able to soothe themselves because the eating disorder has really been a way to cope with threat through drive, and their soothe circle hasn't developed, for lots of different reasons over the years. So even physiologically, trying to soothe yourself so that you can even begin to have these discussions and think about what compassion means to you and what your fears or blocks are is really hard when you're not able to slow down even, or be in your body, or hear that somebody is trying to connect to you. Do you know that you might perceive things always as a threat, or that I can't trust people? So earlier on, begin to just physiologically help people learn how to access their soothe system, which is threatening when people don't know how to do it, or maybe haven't been safe to do it before. And that takes a bit of time. And then if you think about people being in an inpatient ward, away from home, being fed, which is activating the threat system, and then asking to slow down and to learn how to sit or use a compassionate scent or compassionate object. All that sounds really basic, but actually it's really, really different.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's really cool how when you arrive at compassion and self-compassion and start to introduce those topics, some of the fears or blocks or resistances that arise are almost kind of able to be seen in the light of some of the earlier work, which is around the competitive motive, say, for example. And so, self-compassion will make me weak or will make me fail or less motivated. And so already we've got some of that background knowledge where we can start to just reconceptualize a little bit those fears of compassion and self-compassion and bring a different understanding to how those might be arising. And then it's being able the misperception, misunderstandings or whatever of what compassion really is in terms of how we might be thinking about it. And so that becomes the next level of perhaps the psychoeducation. What is it we're really talking about here? It's perhaps not so much pity or some of those ideas that people are more resistant to, but it's perhaps this other thing. We
Yeah.
start to introduce that a little bit.
And it's nice kind of giving that stuck around in a way that it's not our fault, that actually we are programmed to compete, we are programmed to need care, we are programmed to give care. We do have a threat system to protect us. So I think another kind of fear or block might be that people know that they really do need care, and they really, really want it. But they're so afraid of going with that in case it's rejected, like maybe it has been before, or in case it comes across too needy. So being able to have some of the concepts already kind of sprinkled in that actually it's a biological need to receive care and to give care. But it'll come out in different ways if you don't have it in your early upbringing or in your life. It might come out and ending up in hospital because that might be the only way that you get care is when you're sick enough, when you're thin enough. Um, and similar with competitiveness, that actually in the world that we live in now, where there's so much emphasis on appearance and weight or size or shape or different diets and social rank in relation to appearance and attractiveness. We were designed to compete for food and shelter and territory. And actually that's coming out now in the world that we live in a very different way. We're also in a world where we're surrounded by food. Well, our country is, and your country is, but not everybody is obviously, but the food is much more freely available. There's advertising companies who are putting kind of saying, marketing around different foods that you should eat this, you should eat that. You go buy different brands and the smell of food will entice you in. So there's so many things in the world that we live in now that our bodies and brains weren't designed for millions of years ago that are going to bring in that conflict. So when we think about competitive minds, people want to be attractive and higher in their social rank because that's what society is valuing, but also they're surrounded by food, which we have a kind of a seafood, eat food body that was designed for survival, but not for the world that we live in. So there's a lot of conflict that people with eating difficulties are struggling with.
Mm.
Um, and I suppose it's part of understanding that in a psychoeducational way then helps people maybe think about that and how it impacts themselves first.
Mm.
But to go into that language that we always use when we talk about self-criticism, self-blame, it's understandable that you're struggling with this. It's understandable that you're in conflict. You didn't design your body and brain, but you also didn't design the world that we live in now. And your bodies and brains weren't designed for all the how fast things have moved for us as humans.
Mm.
Um,
It's such a double bind for people, isn't it? On the one hand, these competing motives too, I suppose. Like there's the competitive motive and the social rank stuff, and seeing others and having those self-conscious emotions arise, and the kind of competitive or social comparison that arises, and all of that stuff. And then there is also at the very same time a deeply felt need for care and affection and kindness and support and all the rest of it that is sort of so deeply and painfully felt as well. And these two, I don't know if that's a dialectic sort of thing, but there's these two things that are both true at exactly the same time. And it's such a pulling in opposite directions experience for people.
and that's why then it makes absolute sense how an eating disorder can be helpful, because if you then go towards, say, restricting, um, you get to escape from those feelings. Your mind goes into biological starvation where you're thinking about food and you're not feeling as much. We talk a little about self-critic and help us avoid painful things because we get caught up in our tricky brain loops, but so can then thinking about dieting and restricting and calories and numbers. Part of your body wants to hunt food and the other part of your brain is saying, no, don't eat. So with all those conflicts, restriction makes perfect sense. Binge eating makes perfect sense because, again, that can be another way of soothing. I don't have to ask people for care or comfort. I don't have to risk that rejection because actually it's easier for me to go to food. I can dissociate or numb or disconnect. So, whatever eating disorder strategy it is, I suppose the outcome is that often people then numb and distract from emotions and distract from what's happening in their lives too. And that works really, really well in the short term. And it can work really well for a long period of time in people's lives. And I think that's why eating difficulties are like the outcomes for eating difficulties are much less, aren't as good as other difficulties and mental health problems that people have because they do work. They do help people escape and avoid and not feel and distract from what's happening in their lives. And of think about it, it's like if you have something that you go to every day, if you recently my phone has stopped working and I realized I depend on it for everything. I couldn't get somewhere the other day because I didn't know the way because I didn't have my phone. So if somebody, and I'm poor Vodafone or O2, whatever company I was talking to, and they wouldn't get me the phone quick enough. So if somebody takes something from you that you depend on, you're going to go into threat. You're going to fight them. You're going to avoid them. You're going to appease them and say, yeah, sure, and then do it anyway. So I think that's when people are going into treatment, it's worked really well for them. And then we're asking them to eat more, which means they're going to gain weight, which means they're going to feel more over time, or they're going to stop binging and they're going to feel more. And their weight mightn't be the size or shape that they want it to be. So eating disorder treatment is really hard. It makes people feel worse. It's instead of most people think when they go to therapy, they're going to feel better. But when you do this, you feel worse for a while. Hopefully not forever, but you will guarantee that you're going to feel more. But it's a very courageous thing to do because you're letting go of something, that really has really helped you. And people often describe the difficulties that it is the friend that they want to keep, but actually is really mean to them, but they still want to keep that friend. And they're worried if they don't have that friend, what else will they have? Because it consumes so much of their life, and again, that's why it's been helpful, is because it has distracted them from the emotional pain or difficult things in their life. But then the cost of it is that then there isn't other things in their life that they've paid attention to or even been able to cognitively pay attention to. So that's usually only when people start coming to treatment in a more, we were talking about motivation a while ago, when people are more motivated, is when the unintended consequences of the disorder are greater than the intended consequences. And it's very hard for people to come to a treatment that's going to make you feel worse unless you're thinking this is going to help me at some point, or this is actually causing me too much problems. It's different for everybody.
It's the ultimate example in a way of self-compassion not necessarily being about doing something that feels good, but rather doing it because it's kind of good for you. And that's, that's where the strength and courage and wisdom really comes in but you're making very tough choices there, really in terms of letting go of something that has worked so well, but also letting go of just a sense of one's own identity and sense of self. And there's so much really in a way that they're giving up or sacrificing or feeling like they might be losing. And so up comes the threat system and the blocks and so on.
And the fear of the unknown, which, is really, really difficult with the sort of this certainty or perceived certainty. So not knowing who you are when you don't have your eating difficulty, not knowing your identity, not knowing how, if you've been organizing your life around what weight you are because you're worried that if you're higher in a bigger body or gain weight that you might be loved, that you might be rejected. That's another fear or block. So actually maybe your world might change. Maybe that's true. Maybe actually relationships might be different if you change in your body. But also, I guess when you begin to be more compassionate towards your body, you're also being more compassionate in your everyday life. You're being more assertive. You're saying no to things. You're standing up for yourself. You're realizing what's important to you and what isn't. So your world can change around you. And you can maybe realize actually that maybe those friends aren't the friends that I want, or maybe my relationship isn't the one that I'm happy in. And maybe the eating disorder has masked that for so long. To know that actually I kind of got a way to avoid that difficult relationship that I'm in because the eating disorder is consuming me more. Sorry, my voice is going there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. One of the things that I guess is really occurring to me in this moment is that there's the psychoeducation and the obvious benefit of this gradual exposure to these concepts and ideas and so on. But I'm just imagining that the there's something really important in the therapist and the facilitator and in the therapeutic relationship that's developed there. That safeness that is able to be hopefully, kind of cultivated within that therapeutic relationship or the therapeutic space. What sort of thoughts do you have there, or what do you really, as a team, try to do as therapists, the part that you might bring to all of those processes so far?
That's interesting because I think I always would have thought, okay, it's really important to engage the person to me as a therapist or to the co-facilitator as a therapist. But over the years, what we really try to do is engage everybody to the model and to the group. And that we, use our kind of group experience to help the group make the group safe. I typically just do CFT in a group because I think it works so much better in a group. I know you could do it individually, but things just happen quicker in the group because you've got the environment. So we're always trying to engage people into the model because I don't want people thinking, well, oh, the facilitators asked me this question and they always know the right questions to ask me. I want you to know what questions you need to ask yourself. You're the expert. You'll be able to tell me this. Going, no, you're the expert in yourself. I'll have done my job when you've developed your compassionate mind that you're able to problem solve and work out this dilemma. I can support you in doing that, and the group can support you in doing it. But actually, what's most important is that you're engaged to wanting to be a compassionate person, wanting to have compassion in your life, wanting to know, okay, I'm unpopular, this is tough, but actually this is our feasible, but this is the right thing for me. So we do work very hard at creating safeness in the group. And people connecting to each other and responding in a really appropriate professional way at all times, working very hard in the room to show the links to compassion, modeling that for people and the flows of compassion in the room. And what I love about CFT is, as facilitators, you do a lot at the beginning, but towards the middle and the end, sometimes you can sit back and actually the group have it. The group are looking at people's meal plans and going, I think you need to eat a bit more, or, and they've internalized voices. Are they asking really good compassionate questions when somebody's critic is online? They're able to say, actually, I feel really upset when I hear your critic. So they've maybe learned that. I think compassion is already within people, but obviously it hasn't been developed for different reasons. So I think it gets kind of sparked in the group, and obviously the facilitators, we model it. And then over time, people internalize that and connect to it with the compassion they already have in themselves anyway. So I think we do work hard to correct safeness, really hard to work in the model, but also not to fall into the trap of it's only because it's this therapist that I'm able to do this. It's actually, no, this is your mind, charge of your mind. You can make those decisions, what feels wise, what doesn't. And that, I think that's really life-changing, because I think lots of people with eating difficulties have been disempowered by the eating disorder. And it has been a way to escape life in some ways, unconsciously. So I think then to put a lot on a therapist or a doctor or a nurse kind of further disempowers the person, so it's kind of, I want to keep giving the power back to them so they make decisions, they learn what's working for them, they know in their body what feels wise and what doesn't. And we can ask questions to help that, but we're always trying to help people connect to, well, what do you think? What do you notice in your body when you go with that? What do you notice in your body when you go with this? Is this what you would feed your child? Is what you would feed a friend who was going through what you were going through and they were staying with you? No, you give them more. Does that make sense, or does that answer
Yeah,
your question?
the therapist is really sort of a light touch part of
Yeah.
the process in a way, and it does sound like keeping one eye on facilitation of things and one eye on group dynamics perhaps, or things like that, but staying really very evocative and exploring and guided discovery and really tapping into the group's wisdom, such that as time goes on, the therapist almost actually starts to do less of that, and you create a kind of a sort of a dynamic in the group itself where they're somewhat facilitating it themselves and supporting each other, I guess, through that and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but we do, in saying that, we do start off and continue kind of in a, what I now understand to be a compassionate way of working, in a like very, we let people know what they're in for, what the group involves. We let people know that we expect these behavior changes, these BMI changes if people are underweight. We let people know, obviously, when we're in the therapy part, and I can go through the different parts of it in a while, that people will be weighed. We expect people to fill in meal logs. That's the deal, you know. So if you want to do the program, that's what you're signing up for. So there's no surprises.
Mm.
Um, and if somebody isn't eating enough, we're not going to, you know, we'll be firm on that with them. But over time, we want them to know that, you know.
Mm.
But initially, people may not have a compassionate mind fully to be able to see that. But we're so there's a firmness and a lightness maybe at the same time. A firmness around biological change is really important. You can't be just engaging someone to compassion. It has to be compassion towards your body, towards the biology changes. But you can't have them separate.
Yes.
Of, oh, somebody's really the compassion part to everybody else and to themselves, but they're not eating. You know, it's like no,
Yes.
no, eat is compassionate.
Yes.
Letting go of disordered behaviors is compassionate. Otherwise, you're harming your body. You know, your
Mm.
body is your friend. It is actually your friend. It's been hanging around with you all these years. It's put up with everything you've done to it. And it's still there, you know. And if you treated a person maybe the way you've treated your body, maybe that person wouldn't still be there. So I do actually want you to begin to feel guilt when you've harmed your body, you know, because guilt
Mm.
is in the caring mentality. So if you've activated guilt appropriately, then you're feeling bad for having not eaten. You're feeling bad for having purged or restricted or done something, or ignored a body signal. And actually want you to tap into that and repair that. Like the function of guilt is to repair. So if you've done something that isn't okay to your body, you know, let it know and give it what it needs.
Yes.
Um, Eventually, we start saying those things, but eventually we want people to be able to do those themselves.
Mm. I mean, there's a lot of therapist skillfulness that goes into it. I mean, that, there's many things that the therapist might be thinking about or considering, many little decision points and choices along the way. It's about being safe and engaged and warm and understanding, and it's about being real and having a sense of there are certain boundaries, or there's a sort of an advocacy there of health and well-being, I suppose, and it's there's a lot of skillfulness by the sounds of it, that the therapist might, in the end, look like they're sort of just kind of sitting there as the group does their thing or something. But actually, it's like it's the duck underwater, probably. There's
Yeah,
a lot going on in the therapist's
yeah,
mind to sort
yeah.
of help create that, and really sort of draw all of that from the participants themselves. Yeah. You Oh, sorry, were you going to say
You
something?
know, and I was going to add something. And it's so important that the clients get that themselves because I, in the world that we live in, you know, you think people are being compassionate to their mind or their body, and then they'll go to, I don't know, a different doctor, a cardiologist, or a sleep specialist, or the GP, who will say, "Well, you need to lose weight," you know,
Ah,
and then someone with eating difficulty would be like, "Okay, you know, I need to do that," and I'd want to. My drive will want to be on the phone to every doctor there is and say, like, please don't say that to the eating disorder patients. You know, you're going to trigger their eating difficulties. They may be in a big body, but they're not binge eating. They don't need to lose weight. They're much healthier. You're now going to trigger a cycle of restriction. But if they've internalized the voice of the group, then they can go wherever and meet whoever and be like, no, this is my body. This is what's healthy for me. And I know you're telling me to lose weight, or I know you're telling me to try this diet or this food, but actually, I know that's not compassionate for me. Because you can't bring, I can't bring everybody in the world and say, don't say that to my client.
yes,
Um,
yes.
and the same, you know, unfortunately, people do make like not necessarily a medical professional, but others, you know, generally do make comments to people about people's weight or size or shape, or when you lose weight, you're looking well, or you know, so any, you know, it can be something so small, it can be something really big and hurtful. Often people with their eating difficulties do have family members who probably have had undiagnosed eating difficulties themselves, who do go on diets, who do talk about food all the time, at Christmas time, anytime during the year. So again, you want people to have a compassionate mind, that they know how to respond when they're triggered by that it's not going to activate another sort of behavior, that they're able to have compassion for themselves being triggered, but also compassion maybe for the other person who doesn't understand or doesn't know themselves, or is going through that themselves, that maybe
Mm,
they're to a flow of compassion towards their eating difficulties rather than that person's eating difficulties triggering them back to where they started.
mm.
Mhm.
It is remarkable sometimes. You hear from people we're working with, the sorts of things that doctors or health practitioners but also family members or friends say, and you sort of think, oh, I really thought we were sort of in a different phase now. That sort of thing is sort of more what we used to say, sort of many years ago. But it still, yeah, it's little, or very tricky things get said still to this day, and can, yeah.
And so many of our clients I worked with were the family members say tricky things, and they've pulled up their compassionate mind and have confronted them saying, please don't say that. But then the person will say it again, and the person may not be saying it deliberately to hurt them. It is actually probably something that's going on for them, and they don't realize the impact, that maybe they are seeing the world from a doubting mindset in some way. But I think that's so hurtful for the person who's put up the courage to confront the person, and then it's like, where do you go? You have you need compassion to help you with that, because you've done the right thing, you've given them the knowledge, they haven't been able to do it, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong and that you should do what they're doing. You do need to have your own identity, and be able to have compassion for yourself, and that it's really hard, it's disappointing, that person maybe's let you down on that, but that doesn't mean they're not for you in other ways. And that doesn't mean that you go to your eating disorder. How can you cope? How can you feel the pain of that, the disappointment, but not think that not go to the criticism and it's my fault, or that I've done something, or I'm wrong. So
Yes.
that's the power of compassion. You're really trying to build people up, and so that they can navigate all these things when the program is over, when they don't have the group. Like you were saying earlier, that their identity that maybe was put up with eating difficulties is now different. They now have more of a compassionate identity, that they're a compassionate person in their lives without the eating difficulties.
Yes, it's the flows of compassion even come into those moments, and sometimes if we're able to sort of connect with the idea that this person has a tricky brain too or something, then that can sometimes just soften a little bit the way we receive what they have to say, and we can kind of start to create the flows. Paul Gilbert sort of says we have tricky brains, but I know in CFT the idea is we have tricky brains and bodies actually, and
Yes.
I wondered whether you wouldn't mind perhaps telling us a bit more about CFT-E and maybe some of the differences there even between a CFT approach and the sorts of things that you might do or change or emphasize in CFT-E.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'd love to. Yeah. So I might kind of go through the protocol, because that will then help me organize it kind of coherently for you and the listeners. So we always do a full day of psychoeducation, no matter how much CFT or CFTE somebody's had, and that really is that kind of this is what we're offering you. This is what you're in for. Do you consent? And in that kind of psychoeducation day, we kind of go over the concepts of what eating difficulties are, what compassion is. We talk about the tricky brain, we talk about the tricky body, and within the tricky body, there's a couple of things. One, that we don't always get to choose the size or shape that nature is intended for us, or the weight. And we draw on the idea of set point theory, where our body works really, really hard to help us to be at the weight that's the most healthiest for us. And that mightn't necessarily be in that perfect BMI category. That mightn't be right. If you think about rugby players, their BMIs aren't in a range of 20 to 25. And there's lots of people in bigger bodies who are very healthy who don't have that BMI. But if you don't listen to your body, if you override your hunger signals and your fullness signals, then that's going to impact your set weight in some way. So if you're not listening to your hunger signals and you're not eating enough, your body's still working hard to be at the weight you should be. So it's going to slow your metabolism down. It's going to slow down your heart rate. It's going to make your temperature more cold to conserve energy. It's going to slow down your organs. It's going to slow down your brain, because it's working really hard to keep you at that weight. If you eat more and override your signals, you're going to end up gaining weight. But what happens is that people often restrict, their body slows down, they can't keep doing it, or they go back to eating a bit more, and then they end up binging because they've been hungry, and then their body is fluctuating, their weight is fluctuating. So often people will come back saying, look, my set weight keeps going up and down, I'm yo-yo dieting, my weight is changing all the time. And that makes sense. When you restrict for a while, then you end up binging. Then when you're binging, you end up restricting. So we're asking people to think a little bit about what is it like for you to think that you didn't ask your body to do this, just like you don't ask your body to breathe. Your body is working really hard behind the scenes to slow down your metabolism if you're not eating enough to keep you alive. That's why you start beginning to obsess and think about food, because biologically your body wants you to go and find the food. You might feel great initially because it's giving you a bit of burst of energy to go out to hunt, but actually everything else is slowing down. We talk a little bit about the key study in psychoed, where during the war after the war they starved, or they sorry after the war they restricted calories for men who didn't have any eating difficulties by a third, for a couple of weeks to notice what would happen. And they began to think a lot about food, feel really, really, really distressed. Their metabolism slowed down. They got lots of anxiety feelings. Their eating disorder behaviors got more disordered. Their interests just were about food. They'd go to the cinema, they haven't been there for a while, they'd just be looking at the food in the film. And that's the biological impact of not eating enough. And that's only a third. So if people are restricting more, it's even worse. But a third is pretty strong. And then the next one is they want to see how people responded to refeeding. And the men in the group were really distressed around refeeding. They didn't know how much little to eat. That's why we follow meal plans now, because they would have overeaten. They would have hidden food. They would have felt really, really upset during the time. And it took a good while for that to normalize and come back to baseline. But it did all come back to baseline. So we talk a little bit about that study to kind of say, when you are restricting, there's lots of biological factors or impacts of the restriction that look like psychological ones, but actually they're because you're not eating enough. And they're also because your body's working really hard to try to get you the weight that you should be. They're all reversible. But we know from the study, which is completely unethical back then, but we know from the study that the bit that we're doing now around the refeeding, you're going to feel worse for a while. That's not going to last. You're not going to know. That's why you follow a meal plan. We're not trying to control you and say you need to follow this meal plan. It's because actually you've overridden your hunger and your fullness signals. You won't know when you're full. You won't know what's enough. And this is how long we need to do this for. It's roughly about 20 weeks that you'll need to follow a kind of a meal plan if you're following it properly. Okay. So we kind of talk a little about that, and then ask people what might their ideal weight be versus what the body that nature intended for you. So people might have a number that's based on time where they remember they felt happy when they were this weight, or the time when maybe they got married and this is the weight that they were. But actually, when you say, well, what did you have to do to get that weight? And they'll be like, well, actually, I had to exercise 5 times a day. I didn't eat food. I was on shakes, whatever. And you're thinking, okay, so how sustainable is that for you? Your set weight, what do you think that is? Before you had any difficulties, what weight were you? They can't remember. It might be looking at genetics. What weight were your family members if they didn't have eating difficulties? So we get a sense of maybe what is the natural weight for you. And that's probably more in line with what we'll want you to be getting to when you follow a meal plan. We want you to learn how to eat normally and gain weight if you're underweight. And if you're in a bigger body, it might be just eat normally and see what happens and wait and see. If you're in a normal weight, but you have eating sort of behaviors, again, you mightn't be gaining weight, but it's eating normally and seeing what happens to your weight. And then over time, it'll fall back to the weight that it should be. That might have changed if you've eaten more than you should, or if you've eaten less than you should. But it's what you need now to be healthy, to flourish, not to be caught up in an eating disorder cycle where your body then is working really, really hard to keep things working and to slow things down to keep you the way you should be. So that's kind of the tricky body, but you didn't choose it. It's not your fault. And, over time when we work on body appreciation, you might be really angry with your body for not being the size or shape that you want it to be. And you might be really disappointed in it. And it's still your body, it's still working really hard for you. So how do you reconcile that in some way? And process that, write a letter to your body, but how do you almost repair over time with your body that you're disappointed in it, but actually you've also let it down too. So that's a little bit about the tricky body. Then so that kind of leads on to thinking about maybe what are the things people have done over the years to impact their set weight. So maybe it's over exercise, maybe it's taken drugs or laxatives, maybe it's not listened to fuller signals, maybe different things that might impact medication, things like that. So what are the various things you've done? And then looking at if you were to be eating normally in the psychoed, we don't expect people to anywhere to start this in psychoed, but we would map out what normal eating is. That normal eating would be 3 meals, 3 snacks. It would be eating enough. It would be eating a wide variety. If you were going to the gym or doing something active, it would be eating a little bit more because you'd be doing those things not to lose weight, but to have the energy to do them. So we give a sense of people that that's what we'd expect, and these are the changes that we'd expect that might happen. So you might go through some of the psychological blocks or fears that might come up with people. We talk a little bit in detail about weight, because when people hear the word weight, they think fat. We might talk about actually what the body is made up of. So if your weight changes after you've been weighed each week, it might be water. It might be because you haven't had carbohydrates in a long time, that actually now you've got glycogen in your body that is stored, that you get from carbohydrates that's stored in water. So your weight might be higher, but it might necessarily be fat. And that's the kind of wisdom in CFT. So we want to give that knowledge around your body so that you are able to understand the changes that are happening and not listen to the disorder saying, oh, actually, that's because I'm fat now, or I've gained weight now. I know this is what your body needs, and this will take time to settle. And it may keep going up, and we'll use some of the model to help with that for a while, but it won't go up indefinitely. That there's more to the, you don't gain fat by eating one food or feared food. It takes time. So it's a lot of that kind of knowledge, which does seem a lot at the time. We don't expect everyone to take everything in, but we kind of, again, like the groups I was describing before, we kind of want to lay those seeds in, so then when we're doing the model, that they can go back to it and reference it's not the first time that they've heard it. We also explain a little bit about like what a typical day or session might be. We have in our program, after psychoed, there's a skills block, and then there's a therapy block and a follow-up block. So we'll talk about what we do in each of those. As soon as we start talking about meal planning, people get worried. So we're really kind of clear that the next block is skills, where we do, maybe it depends on the program, but we maybe do 8 to 10 sessions, weekly sessions of skills, where we're trying to help people develop a compassionate mind without bringing in a meal plan or being weighed first. We're doing lots of the compassionate imagery. What is compassion? We're doing fears and blocks. We're maybe introducing letter writing if we have time. And then the next block is a therapy, where we're asking people then to follow a meal plan, so their weight might change, get weighed by us individually each week, then come to group, knowing how your weight has changed and using those imagery skills, those compassionate mind skills, and developing more ones like multiple selves or mini formulation, which I talked about in our last podcast, compassionate letter writing, or interviewing a block, interviewing a fear. That we then use those once you've been weighed and you're a little bit distressed, or you've been following the meal plan and you're worried. So you're activated. You're activated as you would be at home. And we use the group to support you, to have a compassionate mind for you and for you to process what's coming up. And often it'll start, on the by what weight being changed. But actually, if you keep doing the model, like something like multiple selves, it'll come to a memory or something that's much further, much deeper than that. So we're kind of looking at the fear. And I think that's what happens, is that people get caught up with the symptoms, that we don't then look at what's underneath it. So compassion looks like, we really want to go what's underneath the fear around weight change. And I think the model just lends itself so nicely to do that. And the way that we've kind of built up the information, psychoed, the skills, so you have capacity to do this work. And then we bring in some things that are going to trigger you, but are part of the biological change, which is eating more, following a meal plan, eating normally, reducing sort of symptoms, then knowing your weight, then you're activated to put the model into practice. And you're doing that not on your own, you're doing that with a group of people who are also experiencing what you're experiencing and relating to what you're relating to, and having a compassion for younger you, what you've got, why you've developed the eating disorder. So their flow of compassion is going to you. And then, of course, they'll do it, and your flow of compassion will be going to them. So if you're being compassionate for others, of course, then it has to land around a little bit for you over time too, because people can connect and relate so much. And then, so in the psychoed, we kind of explain a little bit of what's going to happen and the different stages. And then we have our final stage after the therapy sessions. There's 17 therapy sessions. And then we have 3 kind of follow-up sessions where it's kind of spaced out. We see people every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And usually in that, we've talked a little bit about kind of self-criticism and fears. So of course, for lots of people with difficulties, there's a really big fear of failure. If I'm going to fail the group, I'm not going to do well. Then what will happen to me? Failure in other things. If I let go of my eating disorder, then actually I don't have an excuse. Maybe other things, we will see I'm a failure in other ways. So failures and blips and mistakes and all that kind of stuff happen in the follow-up, and we're delighted with that, because that's then we come back, use your compassionate mind, work through them, and learn that actually blips or mistakes or failures are all part of learning. They're all really important, and that you're not back at square one. And maybe that's happened even on the break and you figured it out yourself, or you've picked up the phone to one of the facilitators and worked it out and bring it back to group. So that's kind of the stages of it. And what makes it different to CFT, I think we're bringing in the tricky body, which is really, really important. We're bringing in the biological change, and we're very specific when we're doing the exercises of starting maybe with eating disorder kind of behaviors or triggers. We do implement things that are typical to other eating disorder treatments, like something like feared foods, which is a kind of exposure. We bring in something like that. We do kind of work on body appreciation, a little bit like we mentioned earlier about activating the guilt system around maybe the harm you've done to your body, writing a compassionate letter, doing exposure. So we obviously, with all the imagery exercises, there's lots of grounding and connecting to your body, but we definitely would add a few more ones so that people are having exposure to being tuned to their body a bit more. So we use some intuitive phase exercises, maybe exposure to your ear and connecting to your heart and to your spine. Maybe beginning to imagine compassionate color around different parts of your body, things like that. We might write letters to your compassionate body, to your body from a compassionate place. And I think just because I know in our service there's a lot of general CFT groups, I think we probably take homework really seriously. So every week in the therapy stage and follow-up stage, people have targets. So they'll always put a kind of energy balance target, eating target, then go into sort of symptoms target and compassion target. And we review those and help people set them from a compassionate mind. So you're always bringing in the model. It's not from a critic mind. It's not, from a you should do better kind of, or, it's really, can we do this from a compassionate place? And initially the facilitators are very much hands-on with those goals, those targets. And then as the group develops a compassionate mind, we even leave the room and let people do it in pairs or small groups and come back when there's kind of issues to troubleshoot. Because the group has a compassionate mind to help each other. If somebody's engaging more in a meal plan and somebody isn't, they'll call each other on it and say, well, I'm really worried about you. You think this isn't enough. Or if somebody's, maybe their critic is really strong and they've made themselves a really unrealistic goal. Somebody will be like, do you really think that's achievable? Maybe we should break it down into small steps. But I think that's a bit is that we do ask people to be accountable to the group. And because it's not transdiagnostic, it's very specific. We have a very specific kind of goals for them. The other thing, I know I'm talking a lot now, but the last thing that's very important in CFT is a broader goal. When we ask people, why you're doing this program, how do you want your life to be different in 6 months' time, in a year's time? Often people cannot think of a goal that doesn't involve their weight or doing something connected to their weight. And their eating disorder mindset is really online. That tricky brain or tricky body that I was saying to you, where they're in biological starvation, so they can only think really about food related stuff. It's really hard to get a goal. So we spend a lot of time throughout the program kind of checking in on those, because we know at the beginning there probably won't be compassionate goals. We kind of try to get people out of that mindset and be thinking, look, there's someone you love who's going through something difficult, or someone you love who doesn't have an eating difficulty. What would you want for them? And what goals would they want in 6 months' time, in a year's time? What would you want for them? To try and help them think about somebody without eating in their life, eating difficulty in their life, because we'll often say that, lots of people who don't have eating difficulties aren't necessarily happy. You've got to work at building a happy drive system, or one that's going to give you meaning and joy. It doesn't just come to you when you don't have an eating disorder. You've got to work at it. So we throughout the program, then at all stages, we'll always check in on those goals, because we don't want to leave them to the last day and think they haven't changed or they haven't been achieved. And they can be really simple things, like you were describing earlier about identity. It can be, well, actually, I don't know who I am. So there might be 5 things I'm going to try out. That would be a goal. So things like that that make it slightly different to general, and quite people have to be accountable to themselves and to the group. And I suppose you can't really be there without doing those changes, because other people are doing them. Like, for example, somebody doesn't want to be weighed, the other 9 people in the group are being weighed, and they don't want to be weighed, so you can't not do that for the group. You've got to kind of row in and be part of the team and the group as well. So sorry, I feel like I've spoken for 10 minutes there.
Boom. Yeah, no, that's it's an incredible comprehensive program, and in some ways the E is integrated into the CFT, and in some ways the E is kind of parallel, although sort of still integrated really, but the the E sort of side of it is in the psychoeducation, it's just sort of built in there in terms of tricky brain, tricky body, and just that whole evolutionary sort of theory around the body and why it does what it does and how it sort of evolved that way, and that that's it's not our fault and so on, and there's sort of that's all integrated in. Later on, it becomes sort of more parallel because there might be certain eating related interventions that we're sort of doing, and then bringing the compassionate mind to that, or sort of the compassionate self kind of is alongside as we might be doing meal plans or other elements of treatment. And again, you're doing that in a way that we really are engaging with the model throughout, I suppose. And so it's kind of, yeah.
And the critic and shame will come in, like we're always looking at what's the fear, what's the block, our resistance, and then bringing back to why is that understandable? Do you know why does it make sense in your formulation? So we're always helping people learn how to formulate, and add to the formulation throughout the group so that they can bring a really good understanding to what's coming up for them, what's stopping them from doing something, what's scary for them, and why does that make sense?
Hmm.
And then going back to, once we have a real sense of why it's understandable, maybe bringing compassion back, not just to them in the present, but maybe it's bringing compassion back to shame memory. Maybe it's bringing compassion back to the experiences of being criticized. Maybe, so there's that kind of work in the present, but there's always kind of bringing it back to younger you as well. And then bringing understanding when you get triggered again. So we do, and sometimes that's a really big piece of work in the group. Sometimes that's a really, lots of chairs in the room, lots of parts being interviewed. And sometimes it's just hearing somebody's critic being really strong when they haven't done something that they wanted to do. And it's just, okay, hang on, can you just go into your chair now and, let the critic speak to you and experience that? Gosh, what was that like? Can you now bring the passion mind on? Which one is easier? What does the group think? And it can be done in 5 to 10 minutes. And then how does that make sense in your formulation? And they kind of, we have like really good booklets with people's formulation, so that as part of the pack, so they can keep adding to it and taking away from it as the group goes through. And I really love that. I think formulation is so important, and it isn't something that stays. That's your formulation and it's done. Your psychological formulation can change, and the more insight you have, the more you develop it. And sometimes even for something like shame, that's so common with people eating difficulties, it can show up in so many different ways that even sometimes we won't have a clue that was shame until later on. Or like, okay, now we need to put that in your formulation. For example, somebody's shame might be making them come into group doing really, really well all the time, but not letting us know about the blips, because they want to look like I'm doing well. I want to protect this vulnerable part of me that might be in trouble, or feel awful if I let you know really what happened. We might know that till much later in the group sometimes, which I kind of might have no idea about. And then you do a float back, and you kind of get, okay, so that's bringing you back to this age. That makes sense. How do we help you now and you then? What compassion message, what letter might you write that, what younger you? Is there a new experience in the group now where you've let us know about a blip or something that you felt was shaming, and actually, other people agree, or other people have had this experience, you're not on your own. Yeah, so there's a lot in it, and very much using CFT all the time to help with eating difficulties and understanding of them.
And flexibility and agility and formulation based choice points where some groups there might be a little bit more of the shame memories work, but for another group, by the sounds of it might be more of something else. It sounds like there's a basic sort of idea of what we're working through, but we might take little detours or emphasize certain things, and it's very formulation based. I mean, I know these are sort of real practicalities, but how long is this process that you're describing?
It's 34 weeks.
Hmm.
So it's spread out probably around over 7 months.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. And is
34
it like full time? Um,
Nope. So one cycle would be one day or half a day a week.
okay.
So they come in group in the morning or afternoon, whichever, and do a 3.5 hour group, and that's it. Yeah. So that's what makes it different to inpatient or day patient for us. There's in the UK, Ken was doing or used to do a more intense version of it for people who were in a much lower weight, where they would have it twice a week.
Mm.
And again, that would make sense because you don't want to not be weighing or having a meal plan for people whose weight is very low. You want to get the skills done as quickly as you can and get them doing the model as quickly as possible. And then I know, I think I mentioned before that Norway study where the RCT happened, comparing CBTE to CFT-E. That was an inpatient setting.
Mm.
So that people were having individual CBTE and group CBTE and individual and group CFTE. So that was very intense over a longer period of time, I think, or probably not 7 months, but over a shorter period of time, but every day. So I guess with the model, they're the kind of elements of it, but you can match it to the population that needs it.
Mm.
So some people may not need the 34 sessions. We used to do a lower number group. People with the lower BMI might need longer. I know in the Norway study, I think it was people who had all done. Sorry, there's a thing over me there. There were people who had all done a lot of treatment before and were seen as quite treatment resistant for the people in that model or in that study. So I think you just adjust the dose, I guess, to what the presentations are.
Mm. Yeah. And is it a closed group or an open group with different people?
No, I wouldn't do it open. The ones in the ward have to be open because there's new people coming in all the time. So I do think that probably impacts them a little bit, but they find a way to make it work, and
Hmm.
again, an Asylum style of kind of helping people who've been there for longer, help people who are newer coming in, and that works really nicely with the flow of compassion. But for here, no, it is kind of, it has to be closed because we have to build up that safeness
Yes. Yeah.
and capacity, that you couldn't come in a later stage unless you have the capacity and have learned the skills to be able to do that. And sometimes people, when we do the psychoed, and we mention all these concepts and we then do the skills, sometimes people may not continue to the therapy. We'll always take a collaborative approach on that to see, do you have enough in the bag to be able to go to the next stage? Do you feel able to use the model when you're distressed around some of the triggers that are going to happen in the group for you? And what's your wisdom on that? And sometimes it's just amazing how wise people can be, where they might say, well, actually it's not the right time for me because I know if I start doing that, actually I'm not going to be able to cope with college, say, that at the moment I'm just well, and my worry is that if I start that work I'm going to feel worse, and actually I don't trust that I'm not going to go back to the eating disorder. So actually I know where you are and I'll come when I'm ready. And I think that's the nice thing about compassion and about respecting the eating disorder strategy, is that it has served people well. It has been something that's helped them cope. And to push people into treatment is just going to activate their threat system. So of course, they're going to be a threat anyway, but they have to want to do it. They have to be ready in some way. And if somebody can say, I'm not ready, I think that I just respect that so much. And I also think we've given them the fair go. They've had the psychoed, they've had the skills, they know what's there, what it entails. And maybe there is a good reason why they need these sort of strategy. Maybe, like, who am I to say it's the right time? It's their lives. They know the right time. Of course, I might be worried. People might be worried. But I think once you're transparent and you say you might choose not to do it, do the treatment, and now we have a bit of a formulation, so you know what was likely to happen. And maybe you need that to happen again to be able to come out of the safety strategy and try something new, or maybe I'm wrong, or maybe you need to go through it. So it's you've given everyone the best chance, and you have to trust people's wisdom. Like I was saying earlier, when people begin to be more compassionate, it's not just about eating; it is about their lives, and they are in their lives and in their relationships. And sometimes we do see that, really sadly, that actually people's marriages maybe are breaking down because this person is getting better, and maybe there's something that they actually haven't the courage to say, and maybe it's opened up something else that's been going on for them in their family. So it's a big deal. It takes a lot of courage to let go of the safety strategy, to feel and see actually what's happening in your life that maybe isn't okay now that you've got more compassionate.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
so
you were part of a recent study, a qualitative study, which then had a little bit of a look at the sort of the before and after, I think, of participants in the program. I think participants sort of described their experiences before the CFT-E as being marked by difficult memories and identity struggles and negative self-evaluation, powerlessness to the eating disorder and emotional dysregulation and so on. But they were sort of interested in change, remarkably, given all of that,
Mm,
but interested in change. After going through CFTE, what stood out to you, I guess, about the shifts that participants
yeah,
experienced and described?
yeah. I'm just going to pull that study, obviously, a little diagram here. Yeah, and just to say, this study, Georgina Mullen did the study for her doctorate thesis in UCD, and it's been really great. I'm going to explain a little bit to you, but also just to say that because the themes that she pulled out of the pre-treatment and after treatment are quite robust and really fit, we're actually now developing a questionnaire on CFT based on these themes.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, so really really excited. We're doing that with Mark Shevlin from the University of Ulster and Professor Gary O'Reilly from UCD, and Lizzie O'Brien, who's one of our assistant psychologists, is leading on it. Um, so again, because when we had questionnaires, we had about 5 or 6 different questionnaires to clients. So we'd love to be able to give one robust one um, that captures what we're doing, what we're looking for, and is also able to screen people's suitability for CFT. So in Georgina's study, she asked people about their relationships with themselves, others, and their eating difficulties, both before and after doing a comprehensive CFT program. And the things that kind of changed, and some things didn't change, but the things that didn't quite change were key memories, which
Hmm.
I think was really helpful because people's memories don't change.
Hmm.
If you childhood difficult childhood experiences, they're still going to be there after the program. But she noticed that they spoke about them with much more understanding and much more compassion and much more coherent. Um, they also, another thing was identity before the group, and they talked about maybe not knowing their identity, and it being not being able to separate it out from their eating difficulty or their mental health difficulties. A new theme emerged post the intervention, that described people having a more compassionate approach to their life and living life. So I think that's that bit that we're talking about of how when something is taken away, CFT gives you something new. It gives you a compassionate understanding or more of a compassionate identity. Other kind of themes that kind of developed new sub themes post were something like evaluation, where people were kind of evaluating themselves, their size or shape, success or failure. After the program, they were able to understand the eating disorder much more. They were able to bring that understanding to help them overcome blocks around compassion and being able to be more caring to themselves and being able to be and knew that caring was actually sometimes being able to be more assertive, or to say no or to stand up for themselves. People before the group described a lot of powerlessness in relation to the eating disorder, a lot of moving from trying to get control to then feeling out of control. And one of the things that came up that people described was that actually relinquishing control actually helped them feel more powerful. And part of being able to do that was understanding the eating disorder. So again, it's probably connected to formulation, and having a stronger belief in themselves and also a sense of responsibility for the change that they could do themselves. Another theme that was there before the group was difficulty with arousal and regulating emotions. After the group, people spoke about being able to connect more to their body, and also how understanding the difficulty and having a connected relationship, or stronger relationships, help them manage difficult distress or feeling dysregulated. And then, as you were picking up on, people talked about a motivation to change before they started the group. And Georgina noted that they did speak about that quite harshly. There was a critic in that going, I know the stuff, I should be able to do it. I know it intellectually.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it was a motivation to change, but I wonder, was it actually a critic?
Hmm.
And that the new theme after was that idea of actually wanting to have compassion in their lives, wanting to live their life more, do more things, and actually eating better. Thank God eating was in there. Um, and I do find when we're screening people, I do hold that in mind because people will be saying, oh, yeah, I want to do CFT. And they've maybe done the inpatient, day patient, or other things. And they're like, this is the next thing that I need to do. And it's like I need to achieve, it's my drive system. Then I'll have done everything, that would be a tick. But actually, that's not really a motivation. That's probably their threat system trying to go to the drive system rather than dropping into what actually this is about. And I guess that's fair enough, but there has to be a little bit more. Why do you want compassion in your life? Why do you want to let go of the eating disorder? How will your life be better? And like, sometimes sometimes people thinking, oh, I should be better, it's like going on a diet. It's like, this is my drive system. If I achieve this, then I will be happy. If I'm this weight, then I will be happy. If I do this program, then I will be happy. But they haven't thought about actually what's making you unhappy, what's underneath this. So they mightn't be coming in with a compassionate mind around it. So that's why doing the psychoed and really helping people understand what the program is about is really, really helpful. And then going back to motivation and using some of the information psychoed to help screen people a little bit more about what they've got from it.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So
Yeah,
that research is so helpful for us in our work, actually, and just thinking things through a little bit better.
yes, and definitely that notion of adding something, that it's not just taking away, it's actually adding something. And there's the way you describe the post group sort of results, that there's a sort of expansiveness to it, that things expand for people, and it becomes, that they're able to have a whole expanded sense of themselves and their life and their relationships, and much less of that kind of restricted, kind of blinkered feeling of how they had been perhaps living their lives.
Yeah, which had been protective, and which is also connected to the tricky body, because if you're not eating or if you're dieting, you're preoccupied,
Yeah,
you're thinking.
it's a little bit of both, isn't it? It's both
Yeah, yeah,
protective and makes complete sense, and it's also a little bit of a consequence of the biological factors, in terms of the starvation, for example, or things like that, I suppose.
yeah.
You've done so much incredible work, and I know you've run the groups, and you now also sort of manage the team, and you've heard a lot of the wisdom from the participants, over the years. Well, has there been a particular, lesson or insight that's sort of more profoundly shifted how you think about compassion as you listen to them thinking it through themselves and talking about it?
Um, I think I think one of the things, lots of things, but I think one of the things is the physiology piece. I think I just respect that so much more and get it now that people, me included, we can be in our heads and then expect our thinking to change. And I think when you're more in your body and you're able to use one or two things to bring your suit system on and feel more grounded, then you're able to do so much more. You're able to think and have a multi-mind and see different perspectives. And I love seeing that in the group where one person might be in their threat system, another person isn't, and they'll just see something totally different. And I think then we'll be able to help that person who's in their threat system to slow down, to engage in their sitting with the breathing, and then be able to see, actually, now I can see that there's so many things that are different. But actually, if I'm sitting here in my threat system and you're telling me something different, I'm just reacting to you or fighting with you or
Mm.
appeasing you or avoiding it. Um, but it's to see it in action, and the gift of being in a group and you're in your threat system and somebody sees something differently. It's just such a gift to be like, oh my God, the world isn't always how I see it. It
Mm.
does depend on what system I'm in. And this person from the other side of the room who's in a totally different system has just offered me something so important. And how could I bring that with me then when I'm triggered again? What would that group member say? What would another group member say? So I think, yeah, being able to help your body, help your mind, and then just the power of being in a group where you have memories of that, and people have done that for you, and be brave enough to have a different opinion to you and not go with you in your threat system, and to be able to then use that. I guess that's why we do the group, is that we want people to be able to bring this to their lives after, so having those memories and new memories. We talked a bit about shame and self-criticism, but that idea that in the group you're building up new memories all the time. So you're getting more compassion, you're letting go of the eating disorder, but you're also getting now a bank of soothing memories or secure attachment memories, and being supported memories at times you're vulnerable. So yeah, so I think those two bits and the power of group. I just think everything just works so well when you're in a group with people who are helping each other. The humanness and the goodness of people just comes out.
Yeah. Yes, I really agree with you about the body and the physiology and so on. I remember a couple of decades ago as a CBTer doing a cursory go at the progressive muscle relaxation or whatever, but and perhaps I was doing all of that wrong, but just CFT and what Paul Gilbert has sort of really brought to us, just realizing the profound nature of being able to connect with one's body and everything from body posture to the breathing to the down regulating to the standing and moving as the compassion itself. It just seems to be, kind of the some of where the magic arises from that. Um,
Yeah.
but uh, but yes, Dr. Clodagh Dowling, thank you. I will actually put some links to the papers you mentioned. You mentioned the Norwegian study as well, so I might pop that one in the description below. But yes, thank you very much for a wonderful sort of outline and summary and deep dive really into CFT-E. And thank you for coming and talking to me on compassion in a t-shirt.
Oh, well, thanks, Dan. Thanks for all the amazing work that you do, and thanks for spreading the word about CFT. I'm always really happy to talk about it. So thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.